Okay, thank you. Because there's some couples that's not a big deal. For others, it's a huge deal. So you have to take that into consideration. Um, but these are very common issues, and they're not going to go away. And some of them are very workable. PE is very treatable with an antidepressant a lot of times because it delays the process of erection and ejaculation. So, being willing to try some things different. This goes back to what we talked about, the conversation and the coaching. Maybe the problem isn't that there's a medical issue. Maybe it's how hard you're doing something. Maybe it's the touch, the pressure, the stimulation. Does it need to be longer or shorter? Again, we're talking about nerves and blood flow and all these physical things that are just, it's like if somebody grabs your hand for a long time and you lose feeling in it. Guess what? That's just how physical things work. There's a lot of discussion about size, and size does not matter. It really doesn't, and it never really has, and it's okay because size is not an issue. The vagina can hold a very large penis because there's only not that many, and it can hold a very short one, and you can have the same pleasure. It's all possible. I think the other things are pain. If you have pain issues that are coming into your sexual life, I would really encourage you to deal with them. A lot of your OBGYNs, when you go to them with pain, will kind of go, oh, well, just get over it, take some birth control, and it'll go away. They are not trained to deal with your pain issues. That's very interesting to me as I was doing my classwork, was how little your actual OBGYN has any sexual education at all, much less how to treat your pain issues, which really, you look at the body, this is a huge bundle of nerves in the vaginal area, and they're all connected to differing parts. So it's very difficult to find the answer. And you gotta find someone who will stick with you and stay with you in the process. It's not a fun process. It can be quite frustrating and quite overwhelming, but it is incredibly prominent. Matter of fact, I have friends in the Metroplex that have groups because it's so prominent. They have support groups for women who have sexual pain issues because it's so prominent. And so my advice to you is if sex is painful, it really shouldn't be, and you don't really want it to be. And you could push through that, and sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't. And so you have to be mindful of that and accepting of that and go back to good enough sex. But I think also see your doctor or call me and we'll find somebody to help you. But there's a lot of options. There's more options out there than you think, and that most doctors are aware of. So we can talk about that. Let's see. Aging. We're all getting older. Sorry. I know we're supposed to be on the better side. It's not that bad. The reality is, statistically, people from their 50s on are more satisfied with their sex life at that age than they were when they first got married. And I think the reason is because you know what you're dealing with, and the expectation goes down, and it's just going to take longer, and it's going to take a little bit more work, and you're willing to do it, and that it can actually be very comforting of spending that time together, and that knowing that we've been through that whole other route of things. But the problem is a lot of what happens is ED starts happening, pain maybe start happening for women in menopause. You've got lubrication issues. There are some wonderful products on the market for lubrication. There's more than you could ever imagine. There's actually Christian websites where you can buy those things that are non-pornographic and it's not Adam and Eve either. Yeah. It tells you who knows.
They're the ones who screwed us up to begin with. So.
Well, yeah. And if you watch DirecTV, they're on TV. It's like two women sitting there, like, and this vibrator does this, and this. And you're just like, seriously, it's like home shopping sex toys. It's true. I'm serious. Have you watched it? Have you seen it? It's true. That's a true show. It's Adam and Eve. It's a company that sells sex toys and sex products. And there's these two women on these really nice chairs who are showing you it's home shopping time. And then they put it up in a little box and you bid on it and buy a bunch of them. Yeah. So anyway, just letting you know, it's not that. But there are some really good, there's a place that used to be called Book 22. It's now called Covenant Spice, I believe, and it's a Christian website. And it just doesn't have all the pictures and the weird stuff. But it has a lot of variety, and it's very spiritually oriented, and I kind of like what it's doing. But aging is part of that, and it just takes longer. You fight for it. You're just more into it. There's a richness to it that you just don't get, I think, any other way. Erections start becoming a problem at 35 to 40. You know you can have sex without a firm erection. You know that, right? It doesn't have to be hard all the time. There's a lot of different options for that too. So, have an alternative plan if it's not progressing well and you're physically not able to have the sexual result that you want, or that you're too tired or too whatever. But there's so many factors that you can get involved in all of those things. Medication probably being the biggest factor. So if you're taking all those medications, if you're taking blood pressure, an antidepressant, and a heart pill, you're probably going to have some struggles having erections. But doesn't mean you can't have sex. It just means it might take a little bit longer, and it just might mean you have to get creative with that. So,
All right, next one.
after that,
Okay. Supply and demand. Man, this one is so close to each one of our hearts. Honestly, the tie with sex and worship is so strong. Sex should be this powerful in what I'm about to talk about. When I get rejected, that is probably the most devastating, especially when it's ongoing, devastating issue I've seen ever come into my office, and just sitting with other humans, not even just as a therapist, but just sitting with other people. That idea of being rejected in this area is so powerful, negatively powerful, and what it does to me, how it affects just my understanding of who I am, what I'm worth, what somebody else thinks of me, my self-evaluation, my self-esteem. It just ripples through all those different parts of our lives when I don't get affirmed through every acceptance of my offerings of sex with my spouse. And I think it was supposed to be, because I think, again, sex is worship, is the closest thing horizontally that we have to the intimacy that we can experience with God. That I think it's why it carries so much power when we get rejected, when it doesn't go the way I thought it was going to go. And so I guess I just say this to you to say it should hurt. Okay, it should hurt. It should affect me. It should impact me. The more important question being, but what do I do with the hurt? What do I do with the rejection? What do I do with those feelings of shame and those feelings of guilt that come when that happens? Where do I take that? Because they're going to happen, and they're powerful, so don't underestimate them either, but where do I take them? And ultimately, I see rejection comes down to, more than anything, more than even my sexual relationship with my spouse, how well that is or how well that isn't going, has so much less to do with that. It has everything to do with my heart. I think it's in this way that God, we talk about God being a jealous God, He is so after every part of my heart. And so I wonder, yes, rejection hurts, but why does it hurt me this much? What part of it is it about my heart? What part of it is about me that I'm not allowing Him to affirm in me, but I'm trying to find that in my spouse. I'm trying to find that in my sexual relationship. There's something I'm holding on to. There's a piece of it that I want to own, that I'm asking my spouse to validate for me, and when they don't, I experience its power, its negative effect on me. And so it makes me wonder where my heart's at. What is God vying for in my heart that it hurts as bad as it does when it does. And how do I allow him to have it? Because while I experience rejection, if it sticks, if it's something that follows me the next day, if it's something that follows me the next week, if it's something I can't let go, I find myself being hateful or disrespectful or ugly towards my spouse because of it. I can kind of trace it back to that. There's a place that I'm not allowing grace to enter into my life. I am trying to find this piece of my okayness from my spouse's approval and affirmation of me through sex. And so I'm looking to her, or you're looking to him, for that affirmation that was never meant to come from them. They were never meant to be the ones who satisfied your heart. They were never meant to be the ones who told you you were okay, that you were okay because he said so. Sex isn't bad. We talked about this whole time. Sex is God's design. It's what I ask of sex that can make it bad. If I'm asking sex to be something for me that affirms me, that validates me and who I am, I'm in a world of trouble because it won't do it for me. It can't. It doesn't have the ability. It's created like I am.
Yeah, it's a metaphor for that. It's a picture of that kind of closeness, but it is not a substitute for that closeness
Right.
that we have with God.
Yeah, and the problem is, like a drug or something like that, it does actually work. It actually
Right.
feels affirming, it feels validating, but it does so for a short term, right? So I keep going back to it, and I keep asking it, and I keep asking it to affirm me, to validate me, tell me I'm worth something, give me my identity in this, let me know I'm okay, and it never lasts because I'm asking sex to do something for me that it can't. It can't. And so then I understand it in a negative term or in a negative light, or becomes something ugly, or the person that I'm doing it with becomes something ugly because I've set it up for failure, because I'm asking something from it that it can't give me.
Right. Very powerful.
So with supply and demand, the idea is just that what that identifies in me is more of a heart condition than it is anything else. What part of my heart do I own that God is asking for? And it's coming to light when I find that my okayness, when I find my okayness in anything that isn't God, that becomes what I worship. I go to the altar of that. I go to the altar of sex to give myself, to give my energy, to give my time, to give my devotion, because I'm asking for it to make me okay. And it can't. And then there's that dissonance, there's that frustration, there's that anger that actually, I mean, it gets way past frustration, right? Like, let's be real, like, it gets to where I don't even want to look at my spouse anymore if it gets that far. You know what I mean? Because it was so devastating to me, because it's so powerful, but that's why it was never meant to be found horizontally. So,
Absolutely.
that's what I'd say to that.
I think that's such a powerful, powerful piece to this, is understand when we substitute like that, we'll always lose out.
Be lacking.
We lose out, and the other person loses out. I mean, it's just not intended for that.
Right.
Absolutely.
My okayness is meant to come from God alone. And it's the power of the rejection that tells me I'm finding my okayness in it. And so I almost don't even want to be upset at the feeling of rejection. I almost want to use it as a signal, as a light that tells me, okay, this is here, which means something's not right. A piece of my heart is owned by me and not by God. So I almost don't even want to condemn the rejection. I almost, if I'm mature enough to look at it in this light and go, it's trying to tell me something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's trying to tell me
Feedback,
that I'm holding on to something that he wants. And so let me use it that way. And in such, even the rejection will bring glory to God, because it would draw me to him.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
that's all I got on that one. You got the clicker.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us to going it alone.
Yeah, so why is that a male, by the way? I mean, is that like...
Because you made the pictures.
Oh, I did do the slides, so...
You
Freudian
chose the
slip, I
picture.
guess, maybe.
You chose the pictures, John. Every time I talk, the question of masturbation comes up every time. And so I will try to answer that to some degree, that there is room scripturally for masturbation and self-pleasuring. I think it's a really good tool for women to find out how they respond, to learn about their bodies, to learn how to touch your body in a healthy way. We don't often talk about female masturbation. It's usually about men and pornography, and kept in that camp a lot. And that's not true. Sure, men masturbate to pornography. They've been doing it for a long time. It's not healthy. It's not good for your relationship at all. And we could probably do a 4-hour seminar on that. But the idea, I think, when you hold that and under the umbrella of what Jonathan talked about in our first session, that this is, you can go it alone and you can be alone and you start isolating, you're in trouble. That's not the point, because remember, it's oneness. You can't be one with your one. You have to be one with someone. And so we come back to, is it violating what God has put before us? And I don't think so. I think there are definitely places and times in our lives where it becomes way too important. It's kind of like what Jonathan was just saying, is when I'm worshiping that and when that's the only, it lacks intimacy, it lacks my partner. Now there are couples that use that as a kind of a quickie effect, where they just pleasure each other, and it's not intercourse per se. It's kind of like even having a diet of fast food. You know, there's 3 kinds of sex. There's fast food sex. There's sit down dinner sex, and there's fine dining sex. And there's fast food sex that's just come and go, and it's pretty quick. And there's sit down dinner, or you kind of put some candles out and you get things going. You might get some music on your phone or what have you. And then there's fine dining sex, which is like, the whole weekend thing where you don't even put your clothes on because you're not even worried about that. I'm sure you've all had that weekend. It's like, well, I don't know. It's been a while. So it's the idea that you can't, a steady diet of any of that is not good. A steady diet of McDonald's is not good, right? So it's really coming back to what variety and remembering that it's not exclusive, so that there is room, I think, for masturbation in the relationship, which I think that's both for males and females. I think especially if you're the high drive in your relationship and you need to what is the word I'm looking for? Soothe, basically, self-soothe. I think there's room for that, but again, when it goes against what Jonathan was saying, when it becomes my go-to, and I'm not asking God to soothe my heart. Is it a heart issue? It's not permission, it's a heart issue. It's a maturity that says, I'm going to question myself. I'm going to actually put this to God's test, not my test, not everybody else's test, but to God's test of what's in my heart right now. And am I seeking other things, or am I looking at other things? There's no room for a third party. I'm running into this a lot more here in Lawton. I don't know if it's just the signs of the time, but there's a lot of swinging that goes on in Lawton, and there's these polyamorous relationships, what they're calling polyamorous, which are contractual marriages. And I think we're going to see we already are. We're just seeing more and more of that kind of stuff. 50 Shades of Grey didn't do a whole lot for much of any of our sex lives, and there's a lot of discussion on that too. But there's a lot of things I think that we need to that we could take part in and that we could be a part of, and every bit of that though needs to come under the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ, and then allow Him to be the filter for that, not you and I. And not what I want, but what does He want. So, masturbation has its place. I think that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. So last thing, let's get vertical. So kind of a summary of really the apex, to use that word, the apex of this whole thing is this idea that sex as I experience it horizontally is also simultaneously is rooted in something vertical, right? Is my relationship with God. Sex came from God. Sex belongs to God. Sex is sustained through God. And so I just want to read this. I don't have it on the board or anything like that, but it's from this book, Sex in a Broken World by Paul Tripp. He says, think for a moment about how your sexual life would change if you took the worship nature of your humanity seriously. Think of what a difference it would make if you always connected sex to worship. Think of what would change in your sexual thoughts, desires, choices, and actions. You see, if sex is all about you worshiping you, it will never work as God intended it to. If sex is all about you worshiping your partner, sex will never work as God intended it to. Or if sex is all about you worshiping what you get out of sex, it will never work as God intended it to. Worship of anything other than God always ends in the worship of self. And the individualization of things that are designed by God to connect us to things that are bigger than our wants or needs or pleasures. Sex is worship. And I can have a conversation about that. Because I know it's God-given, it's God-breathed, it's God-designed. We can talk about that in our marriage. And I think everything you noted when we were talking about the second one with, let's get physical, all the problems, you're like, have a conversation about that, have a conversation about that, have a conversation about that. It's so powerful for us to even be able to talk about these things. And we have every good and holy and proper motivation to be able to be talking about this stuff in our marriage. So I hope you guys leave at least with the permission that it's okay to have these conversations in our marriage. And the motivation to, right? The fire to, not just the permission to do so. And recognize that it will change things.
It's interesting you say that, Jonathan. In the research, all the research that I've been doing, is the research is actually skewed because of this factor that they're talking about. Well, do people talk about their sexual problems? Do they talk about their sexual pleasures? They're trying to measure these things. But the problem is they don't talk about that stuff in general. But they can't really know, because just the fact of them reporting that they've talked about it, they knew to talk about it, and they reported it in the research, changed the outcome.
Right.
And so just by you having some conversation will change the outcome. It can even get the ball rolling on a bigger picture, on a greater scale. But even some conversation can lead to a better sex relationship.
So, yeah, hope you guys feel like you have the permission to talk about sex in your marriage and you see the importance behind it. So here's what we're going to do. Last chance, fill out those questions that you might have that you want us to answer. We're going to give Carolyn and ourselves about 5 or 10 minutes to kind of go through them, look at them, and then come back with your answers. So right now it's about 4:35. So like 4:45, we'll be back in here again. We'll do question and answer, and then we will get you guys on